Thank you, Auntie. So I will start right away the third and last session. So this session will focus on how public employment data and the intersection of subnational finance and employment data are important to enhance transparency, to facilitate international comparison on employment patterns and capacity at all levels of government, and to support the development of evidence-based policies. So we will start right away because we're a bit late with the schedule. So our first speaker will be Natalia Nolan-Flecha. So Natalia Nolan-Flecha is a senior policy analyst in the OECD Public Governance Directorate, specializing in performance management and public employment for over a decade. So she leads the expert groups on people analytics and civil servants surveys, and she is currently leading the 2024 EU survey of central government public servants. So Natalia, you can share your screen and start your presentation.
Yes, hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to this really milestone event. Thank you very much, and congratulations again to the team working on this. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes, you can put the presenter mode.
Put it in full mode. Okay, thanks for your patience. Yes, so as you mentioned, Charlotte, I work here also at the OECD with you in the Public Governance Directorate in the unit for public employment, and I work on people analytics. So I'm very pleased to be with you here and highlight, of course, how your database is fantastic and is very much aligned with the survey that we run through the Working Party on Public Employment and Management, but at the central level of government. It's called our composition survey, and we've worked together very well to align our methods, particularly the scope and all the categories around legal basis, the age categories, our hierarchy categories, for the other factors that you look at, contracts, working arrangements. And so luckily, because of this excellent cooperation, we can now really provide a much broader picture on the state of public sector workforces, not just now from our point of view at the central level, but also now expanding to subnational, regional, and local levels. So that's fantastic. And this, of course, contributes to much more informed discussions about how our public workforces have to adapt and change, and whether their capacities are able to address the forthcoming policy challenges on many of our country's tables, and of course on government performance. So just to give you this data that I show here is only for the central level, not regional. And for 2020, we're currently updating the database, which should be out next year again for central level. And it just shows you, how much more information we're going to be able to get when we are able to align on gender and age and hierarchy and so forth. It'll be so much more interesting to have those discussions. So many of you have spoken about the importance of the subnational employment data for issues of decentralization and discussions around transfers and grants and so forth. But and all of that is, of course, very important. But also, I'd like to highlight some of the ways in which the data that we're collecting, can be used by academics and policymakers, and also the regional levels of government, to address really key questions around the capacity of public sector workforces. So we're in a context now of until recently, very competitive labor markets with skills shortages in digital, AI, and other functions. Also very quickly changing technology, which means implications for changing skills and ways of working and ways that governments have to work and deliver public services. Especially in the EU, we have aging civil services, at least at central level, with in the next 5 to 10 years, large portions of civil servants getting ready to retire, and big questions about how we're going to replace those civil servants, and what risks this entails, but also for capacities, but also what opportunities this trend can mean for recruiting new types of skill sets because as we all know, public sector employment can be quite stable. So it's really important that recruitment is done right. We're living in a context of declining levels of trust and growing citizens' demands, as shown by the OECD Trust Survey, growing fiscal constraints and increasing complexity and uncertainty in lots of policy areas, new policy demands around climate change, that are AI, et cetera, that require governments to act differently and to have the workforces they need to address these questions. So the data in our people analytics group under the PEM, our expert group on people analytics, we look at all these trends and discuss what kinds of data we need about our workforces to provide evidence for analyzing, the implications of these trends on our governments and on our workforces, and how we have to adapt our people management policies accordingly to ensure that capacities are there. So when we're talking about, how can we make our governments more effective and efficient? What's the right mix of outsourcing or privatization, contracting out, consulting, et cetera? How can we increase flexibility? What kind of, how are we going to address skills, personnel shortages and even skills shortages? How, what does it take to recruit top talent? How can we also ensure inclusivity and diversity to ensure that our civil services reflect the societies that they serve? So all of the data that you're collecting around education, the size of the workforce, the contractual types, the educational levels, the ages and so forth, all of those data points, as they do at central level, shed really important insights on all of these areas and help governments better prepare and be ensure that their capacities are there. In our people analytics group, we look at different sources of data, including the data that you're collecting now and that we collect through the composition survey, but also employee surveys and also key performance indicators in this space, which allow us to look at, how you use this data in different ways at the organizational level and at the public employment level, policy level, to improve performance. So it's data that we use and that organizations and local governments should hopefully be using themselves in their strategic planning, in their own budgeting, in their workforce planning. So recruitment, mobility, succession planning for those who are about to retire or leave. How do we move staff around? In developing their learning and development strategies, in improving their recruitment channels and branding, and attractiveness. Are they competitive in their local, regional labor markets? And workplace policies like remote and hybrid work, well-being and engagement, and as I mentioned, diversity and inclusion. So I just really want to stress that, of course, the data that you're collecting is so important for especially when linked with the finance data for subjects about broader capacity and decentralization and avoiding unfunded mandates, but also hopefully it's information that you can use and work with your governments to improve their capacities in all of these areas and to have evidence-informed decision-making that will improve the resilience of their public workforces. So thank you. I'll end there, and thanks for the great cooperation, and hope that we can continue to work together going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. And yes, indeed, we tried our best since the start of the project to make our work complementary from the methodology to now. And we built a lot, on the taxonomy that you started on public employment at the central government level to develop our own. In particular, on the definition of the scope of what is public sector personnel and what are all the specificities and how to address them to find common denominators. This was a great challenge for this project. So thank you again. And yes, for sure, we will continue. Now the next speaker is Lars-Erik Borge. So hello, Lars-Erik. So Lars-Erik is a professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. His main research interests are local public finance, fiscal federalism, and political economy. So until 2023, Lars-Erik Borge was chair of the government commission that monitored local public finances in Norway, and he also led the Green Tax Commission evaluating the Norwegian local grant system. So Lars-Erik, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I also enjoyed very much the work you have put on in establishing these databases. But my comments will be related to a paper that I just finished about fiscal equalization together with some colleagues about fiscal equalization systems in the 4 Nordic countries. So the first issue I will raise is that responsibilities differ across countries, also among the Nordic countries. So if you take hospitals in Norway, it's a central government responsibility, while in the other Nordic countries, the regions are responsible for hospitals. And so it's kind of, in Norway, it will be not counted as a regional or a subnational responsibility, but in the other countries it will be. And similarly in Denmark, upper secondary education is a central government responsibility, while in the other Nordic countries it's a subnational responsibility. So in order to evaluate the performance, it is necessary to take such differences into account. If we not do that, we just comparing apples and oranges. And I can, if I look closely at some figures, I can detect the differences among the Nordic countries. The employment database provide important differences for an input, namely employment, but it should be supplemented with data for output, like coverage, for instance, the share of children below school age in childcare, efficiency, and labor productivity. Yeah. So a point I also will raise is that data for employment must be more disaggregated than in the current database in order to match the variation in responsibilities across countries. And the next point is that it should be a better link between the employment database and the fiscal database, because the employment is differentiated by service sector, health, education, and other. While spending is differentiated by type of expenditure, for instance, compensation to employees. So in order to provide some key indicators, it would be there should be a better match between the fiscal database and the employment database. And my final point, I think age group should focus more on the user perspective. So, for instance, if a childcare is directed towards children below school age, primary and secondary education is directed towards at least in Norway, 6 to 15 years old, and upper secondary education 16 to 18 years, and for care for the elderly, it is important to take account of the fact that the need for services increases with age. So the younger elderly do not require much assistance, but older elderly does. So that was my comments. But I will congratulate you with the work you have put in here.
Thank you very much, Lars-Erik. Very, very interesting comments. And anyway, we will continue the discussion and we look forward to receiving more comments. What you're raising about comparability and consistency with other indicators is very important. And we spent actually quite some time when developing these databases, especially the disaggregated, to make sure that we include the codes of municipalities and regions to try to make them compatible with other databases like Eurostat, in order to cross indicators, because there are some indicators that we won't collect for this database, but we hope that users can take some indicators on finance and employment and use them to cross-reference with the economic indicators or social indicators. And also the point that you raised on the difficulty of a function of governments, like, for example, in public employment, we only have indicators on health, education, and core function, which is more limited than what we have on finance. It's also a matter of the problem of classifications in the national accounts that are not the same between the national account COFOG and the classification of industry that people use for employment surveys. So this is also the things that we have in mind and that we will consider for the future. I will directly move on to the next speaker because time is running. So now I will give the floor to Axel Radix. So Axel Radix is acting division chief of the fiscal management division at the Inter-American Development Bank, working on investment and policy reform to enhance fiscal management in Latin America and the Caribbean. So previously, he coordinated the subnational government cluster and worked as a specialist in IDB's countries' offices in Uruguay, Paraguay, and Peru, and in the Office of Monitoring and Evaluation. So Axel, thank you for being awake in these early hours, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And congratulations on this big effort, which in many ways I empathize because of the many struggles that are in the way of building such a comprehensive database. So congratulations, it's a huge undertaking and effort. And in a way, a shared effort because as we all know, increasing number of Latin America and the Caribbean countries are members of the OECD as well. So let me try to pull up a presentation I prepared.
Okay, we can see your screen.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Great. So what I will share is a very brief presentation in the 7 minutes I have of that of a similar effort we undertook at the IDB as well, of building a subnational fiscal database ourselves. This is what I'm talking about, the Latin America and the Caribbean Subnational Fiscal Information Platform, And I would like to share with you some humble lessons learned from the evolution of this effort, this undertaking that is already over a decade old. You can access it in the website that I'm showing here. It's both in English and in Spanish. Let me tell you a little bit about the history of this database and what it contains. It started in 2012 with the goal of being a website that contains all the information of subnational finances in Latin America and the Caribbean. The big value added of this database is that we have granular information for each subnational entity. Keep in mind that Latin America and the Caribbean have 17,000 subnational governments. 2% are intermediate governments, 98% are local governments. So it's a huge undertaking. And the original strategy was to convert official data to international standards, a big discussion that I'm sure that I heard before, and I'm sure you have in mind. What we discovered along the way is that this is very costly from our perspective. We need to have a lot of nuanced understanding of each database. We need to have experts who convert to international standards, such as the government finance statistics of the IMF. It's subject to errors. And because of that, it needed to be verified with authorities, which is a costly procedure that precluded the authorization of the publication of many of the databases. Also, we wanted to include other dimensions, like the ones like social and demographic indicators, costly to sustain. We came to the conclusion after a few years that there is a huge maintenance cost and low traffic, which questioned the original strategy. And this goes to one of the questions that I see in the panel about how to sustain, how to maintain this database. No? So we changed the strategy to try to make it more sustainable, to reduce cost and increase the benefits of the database. So we publish information as is, whenever it becomes available by the national authorities, with some guidance, public guidance on the discrepancies with international standards. For example, a number of Latin American standards of Latin American countries consider subnational public investment as current expenditure, which is, we know it's a mistake. So we need to make researchers aware of this kind of discrepancies. We also developed a network of government information providers, both to provide the data as it appears online. Some of the countries provide the information not online, but they give it to us. And so we publish information that is not publicly available for the countries. And also, we are trying to make an effort to help the sources, the countries themselves, convert to international standards. Because if they do convert themselves, then the work is done. We don't have to do it ourselves. We also prepared georeference indicators that allow to grasp the potential of the database, both aggregate and the main value added by subnational government. So these are some examples. We have 10 countries right now with information by subnational government. You can pull up the information by topic, income, expenditure, and debt. I have to confess that in debt, we have less countries. We have half the number of countries. You can see by aggregate information by countries, which allow comparisons among the different Latin American and the Caribbean countries, and especially by subnational entity. You can see the example here of Argentina, but we have it at the municipal level in Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Chile, many other countries, in which you can see, for example, aggregate indicators of dependence on transfers or allocation of expenditures to capital versus current expenditure. We also summarize the information of intergovernmental affairs in a parallel publication, which is the Outlook of Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations, which allow researchers to have a grasp of what is the state of the subnational sector in each country, and also links to primary sources of each of the countries so that you can go directly to the source, and blogs that we publish on subnational matters in Latin America and the Caribbean. So in the 2 minutes I have, let me conclude with some reflections on the subnational public employment database, which I think is a great undertaking, and I congratulate you as well. And I think it can be very useful and for some OECD current and prospective members of like Mexico, and prospective, I think, the federations of Brazil and Argentina. What we find of this is that it can also help a lot in terms of analyzing intergovernmental relations. For example, what we find in the federations, at least, is that it can be useful to improve what we call expenditure technical and allocative efficiency. By technical efficiency, we mean that we find that many of the transfers to the provinces or states in the federations, they have some negative incentives. For example, they create what we call the wage premium, especially for less qualified personnel, by which the public sector attracts personnel at the expense of the private sector because it pays more than the private sector. And also allocative efficiency because the marginal transfer is used for more current expenditure, mainly personnel, at the expense of public investment. If you combine the two, it drags development a lot, especially in the less well-off provinces or states. So that's something to look into. Also, it can help to develop a subnational public career, which fosters and retains talent. And I think that it will open eyes about reforms that can improve public management, not only in subnational governments, but also in terms of the incentives, such as the one I described because of the use of the revenue sharing systems in many of the subnational governments in the region. So those were my reflections for today. Again, congratulations and success. I wish you success in this endeavor.
Thank you very much, Axel. So first for the technical achievement of what you are doing with this portal on Latin America. And we are closely following actually the work that you are doing to make subnational data and disaggregated data available to the public for so many countries, but also for all the interesting reflections on this link between financial and employment data to be explored. So now to continue the session, I have the pleasure to give the floor to two country representatives who will present their own experience with producing publicly available data at their country level on both subnational finance and employment. So we will start with Mr. Andrus Yogi. So Andrus Yogi is an Estonian local finance expert and the founder of two data portals for the Estonian government on local finances, employment, and public services. So his main responsibilities include managing and developing financing models for municipalities and developing municipal financial analysis and forecasts. So Andrus, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I really appreciate the work you are doing with the new databases. So thank you very much for that. Thank you also for the opportunity to provide an overview of our state finance application, where we are publishing the public sector accounting data. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. As I understand that every country is publishing their budget execution data, so I would like to clarify what is the difference here. We are publishing the actual accounting transactions of the whole government sector, and this all this data is standardized at its very detailed level. For example, COFOG was mentioned that has 10 function categories. We are dividing those to about 170 different functions. So you could, for example, look how much kindergarten in some municipality is spending on postal service, for example. So the data is from 2004 up to today, and it's updated monthly. And it's freely accessible, and users can use the business intelligence tool to analyze the data on the site. Next slide, please. And I don't see the next slide. Yeah, thank you. It would be best to describe the application as a Rubik's Cube, where the users can freely form the data and shape the data how they would like it to see it, or even disassemble it to pieces if they would like. So the whole data is published there, and the users can freely go into it in most detailed level. it's not restricted. Next slide, please. So there are many advantages if you have a chance to look more into it, more disaggregated data. And I will give you a small and some examples of for what this database has been used lately in Estonia for policymaking primarily. Next slide, please. The first example, for example, to compare two municipalities or more municipalities with each other. There are in the picture there are two largest cities in Estonia, and we can see even with those two the functions expenditure per capita can be very different per function. Next slide, please. And why we have so many employees in a government sector, what kind of work they do, where they work, how much salary they receive, what is their average salary, and so on. Did they get bonuses last December? So everything can be seen on that database. Next slide, please. Average monthly salary of school teachers, for example, in Estonia varies about 40% between municipalities. So as was mentioned before today by many presenters, that this average figure for our country might not be a very good to characterize the difference in each municipality or regional. Don't show the regional differences in there. So we use a lot of this kind of analysis. Next slide, please. For example, we had this general care reform implemented last year, and we are monitoring how this impacted the local government's expenditures and did the extra funding they received for the reform, was it enough for each cases? And it enables us to adjust our financing principles if those things does not match. Next slide, please. As we have monthly data, we can also see how the electricity cost, for example, in municipalities change during this energy crisis, and we use this to support the municipalities during when the prices rapidly increased, for example. Next slide, please. So this shows how the local governments are financing their investments, how dependent they are on the grants, for example, on foreign grants, and how are they self-sustainable in that matter. So we more so monitor this kind of figures. Next slide, please. This local government's financial situation index is calculated based on the data we have in this state finance application. It enables us to harmonize the understanding on in what situation we are with the municipalities, with our partners, and also identify those municipalities that might need our special or more attention. So this was my all of my examples, and thank you for listening. I hope you got a small glimpse of how this more non-aggregate data can have a very useful impact on policy making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrus. And yes, it was very insightful after this first presentations to have concrete examples of how this data can be used to really impact policy decision at the local level in a very short time period, sometimes very quickly and regularly updated. So now I will introduce our last speaker for this session from France, Mr. Luc Brière. So Luc Brière is currently the head of the statistical department of the General Directorate of Local Authorities, part of the French Interior Ministry. And originally is an economist statistician at the French Statistical Office. And so Luc, please, the floor is yours, and we are very looking forward to learning about what France is doing, because I know that it's very pioneer in dealing with granular municipal finance and employment data. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Charlotte. Hello, everybody. Many thanks to OECD and specifically to its regional development and multi-level governance division for organizing this webinar and for inviting me to present this the French experience of data and employment in local authorities. So next slide, please. My presentation will have two parts. First, I will present how we produce and validate our national database on public employment. And then after, I will present the use of this data for analyzing employment in subnational governments. Next slide, please. So our database on employment in general government, we cover, this database cover all general government, so not only employment in public employment in subnational government. Our source come from individual administrative data directly connected to payroll system entities called nominated social declaration. But the main purpose of this data collection is to provide information to the Social Security Fund. So the first purpose is not statistical purpose, but the individual data are transmitted 4 times per year to the National Statistical Office, only for statistical purpose in respect of the strict confidentiality of the data. After, the data are compiled in an annual database in order to homogenize and standardize the data according to the classification and to the nomenclature corresponding of all the job in general government and also in local public employment with in all public grades. And after, in my statistical service for local public employment, it's a huge task of appraising the quality of the data in each public sector. So in another service, they validate health and public hospital and also central public sector. And in my service, so we validate data on the subnational government in order to make studies after on this data. So my second part now, next slide, please. So the use of this data in the case of analyzing employment in subnational governments in France. My statistical office is responsible for data production and statistic studies of public local authorities, not only on local public employment, also on finance data. So the project presented today is very interesting also for us, not only on the topic of local public employment. So the analysis of local public employment is one of our major domain, but not the only one. French local public authorities implement several economic and social activities like water, waste and sanitation management, maintenance and construction of school, college and high school, interurban transport, social assistance benefits. That's to explain that local authorities have specific responsibilities, and it's very important to know that when we have to analyze the data. So these local public services are directly connected to the needs of the population in the territories, including the low density territories. if I present now some results of our data, we can notice that during the recent years, we observe a stability of the total employment in subnational government, but an increase of contract workers numbers and a slight decrease of civil servants. But civil servants' weight is in total always almost 75%. And we have to notice also that some evolution are linked to the transfer of mobilities between levels of subnational government that appears on the period. So next slide, please. And so to finish my presentation, it's the illustration which reflects what I just said in the previous slide. We can see first the evolution of workforce in subnational governments since 2015, and with the huge increase of workers with contract and the slight decrease of the civil servant in blue. But the total employment in subnational government is quite remain stable. And in the second graph, we can see the evolution in the different level of subnational government, with a quite important increase in regional level and a decrease in intermediate government level, when in municipality level and total level, it's quite it remain quite equal. So the difference between regional level and intermediate government level is due, what I said previously, to transfers of responsibility between these two levels. Thank you very much, and that's I put the link on our data on employment in the local public sector, what we disseminate. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Luc. A very, very rich session. I won't talk too much, just to say that the issue of compatibility has been raised numerous times, and it's indeed a priority for us also at the OECD. It's also one of the topics at the heart of the revision of the system of national accounts and COFOG. And we are part of this debate, and we insist a lot on the importance to have granular data at local and state government level. COFOG also data, even at level 2, as you said, more granular level of COFOG, and also making this COFOG classification compatible with other classification like the employment classification. And this could be a way to make these international databases even more compatible. So now, thank you all to all speakers of this session. Sorry, we are short on time, so I will pass the floor to my colleague Margot. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you very much all for an extremely rich and interesting workshop, which is now coming to the end. We apologize for the delay, and we will stop in about 10 minutes. I would like to remind that you can still ask questions in the chat or contact us directly by emails. We will be happy to follow up after the workshop and answer also to the question that we had no time to address today. Please also note that the presentation and recordings will be available also online. And I am now pleased to give the floor to Mr. Carlo Gianelli for concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Margot, and good afternoon again to everybody. So many things have been said and discussed today in these couple of hours that it's difficult now to add anything more. Let me say just a very few words. We've seen I think we had a grasp of the potential of the data that have been presented and of the challenges of using and dealing with those data. So the important thing is that this now open, there's a new season, let's say, of exploration that is opening up before us, thanks to REGOFI, MUNIFI, and the subnational employment databases. I don't see this exploration as a journey without obstacles. I see it really as an exploration. We will find challenges continuously. We will have to find answer to question arising. We have seen a few questions, very important ones that were already posed today. And this is something we have to do. And what really gives a full meaning to this work, to all this, what gives full meaning to the effort and to the investment that have been made, is that we really need the help, we really need the advice, the knowledge from all of you, actually. We really need the communities of policymakers from national, regional, municipal administrations. We really need a community of researchers, of scholars, of consultants that work with this type of data to use, to be involved, to be engaged with this data now on, and to help us improve the quality of the data, complement where necessary, correct the information where necessary, and together be able to make use of this information in new ways that were not possible before. And of course, it has been said by Dorothea at the very beginning, by Antti, these databases have an evolving nature. We very much hope to see them improving, to see them changing, to see them improving and growing. And on the Commission side, as Anna Wagner already mentioned, we will continue to follow. We are following this work closely. We are already analyzing the data, especially on the EU, European Union part, in REGOFI and MUNIFI, in search for issues to solve, in search for interesting patterns, and seeking to provide new indicators measure of what we mean by fiscal decentralization. You got a taste of this with the presentation that Professor Agnese Sacchi gave, and we will continue doing that. So I just conclude here. I thank again the OECD Secretariat for the workshop and for the fantastic work done so far. I thank all the panelists and participants to the workshop today. Thank you for your time. We really hope that putting in the open arena this type of information will be a value added for everybody. What we have today, we have presented, is really a public good that has to be used. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Carlo, and also a big thank from us to all the speakers for their great interventions, and also for the support of the various stakeholders over the last 2 years, which has ensured that these databases are as comprehensive and useful as possible. So thank you to colleagues in National Statistical Institute, Ministry of Finance, Ministries of Regional Affairs, that have provided valuable insight and data for country particularities. I would like also to thank our experts that help guide us through various methodological challenges, including Isidora Zapata, Rose-Camille Vincent, Mathieu Béron, Alexander Aikinen. And of course, I would like to thank the colleagues from the European Commission, in particular DG Regio, Carlo Gianelle, Pasquale Dapice, Jorge Duran Laguna, Anna Wagner, and Lewis Gisra also from the Joint Research Center. So what are the next steps? Very quickly, because we are late. As mentioned by several speakers, these databases have enormous potential, and it was reaffirmed by Carlo, an enormous potential to shed light on various issues from research to policy making. As such, it is crucial to expand the analysis of this data moving forward and improve the data wherever possible. And to develop this work further, it is essential that collaboration with National Statistical Institute, academia, and other international entities continues. Indeed, the the use of this database is still poses significant challenges, first in terms of data availability and completeness, also regarding the improvement of the methodology to make it relevant for international comparisons, while ensuring coherence across levels of government, enabling also a better degree of granularity and decentralization indicators. And we'll have also to sustain it and to maintain this database. So the OECD is excited by the prospect of taking on these challenges to carry on producing high quality statistic. So the next step in the project could be from our side, first updating and expanding the perimeter of the existing databases, such as including, for example, a longer time series and more countries, including missing OECD and EU countries and beyond. Second, improving the methodology to enable regular updates and enhance comparability, including building capacity and engaging more regularly with national statistical institutes. Third step, developing in-depth analysis on subnational public finance and employment, focused on specific topics like the impact of demographic changes on local finance and public employment, the challenges of local finance for some categories of municipalities, as we have data on municipal size, for example, fiscal autonomy and health of medium-sized cities or very small cities. It could also contribute to our work on innovation and competitiveness in regions and cities, our work on equalization, on unfunded mandates. It was raised several times. Also, how this work can contribute to the green and digital transition, to the reflection on public investment and economic performance, on regional and municipal skills, etc. We could also develop predictive analytics using AI technology tools, for instance. And a final key point, these data can bring strong evidence for all policymakers involved in some national and public finance reforms, especially in the context of the European semester and the future of the cohesion policy. So before we take on the next phase of this project, I invite you to begin exploring the data and analysis that we have produced. The database and the synthesis reports are now available on the project website. The link are in the chat. You may also find the database on the OECD New Data Explorer under the topic Subnational Government Finance and Employment. So I encourage you to go and explore the databases yourself, and do not hesitate to send us feedback and comments. So it's no time to close the event. I would like to thank again DG Regio and the OECD project team, in particular Antti, Charlotte, Margot, Brendan, and Monica Collard. And thank you also to our support team, Leslie Greenhow, Elena Arcones, and our communication colleagues, in particular Roxy Glavnova and Jack Walters. Thank you again, and have a nice end of the day. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bonne fin de journée, merci à tous et à bientôt.